Another day in April, looking out the kitchen window at light coming into the fog against the invisible Mount Tamalpais ridge, which, if the fog hadn't come in last night, would have been clearly present, visible, apparently just a stone's throw across the growing longer, now that it's spring, green grasses of the field. Birds chirping from shadowed pine branches at the right corner of the yard. No sound in wave, in channel this morning. Swell disappeared these last few days. Ridge disappeared into the fog. My mother, Lepai, that's what I've always called her since I was a young man. Lepai being her Chinese name, Lepai Ji, also disappeared, at least not visibly, physically present here, except in the mind's eye, so-called, being here in interior recollection, present like the ridge is now, though not visible, concealed in fog across the field of motionless, shadowed green grasses. Since Lepai left us back in December, there hasn't been a day that she hasn't also been here, concealed as if in fog, but somehow present, somewhere inside, where thinking goes on, thinking that brings her to the nearness of the neighborhood at the present moment of thinking, recollection in tranquility, as Wordsworth put it, Wordsworth being one of her favorite poets. And it's the poets that I want to talk and think about here, the poets she loved and returned to more and more often in the last years of her life. Wordsworth and Milton and Shakespeare and Frost and Longfellow and Dylan Thomas and Edna St. Vincent Millay. Because toward the end of her life, at least, at a time when she sometimes lost track of things that had happened more or less recently, she continued to remember things that had happened in her life many years ago, including, in this case, lines of poems that she had learned when she was a girl. Perhaps her mother, my grandmother, had read these things to her when she was growing up. Because Lepai often told me that her mother loved poetry, was herself a poet, though she didn't show anyone her work as far as I know. Or things she read and learned by heart in school, most likely at Wellesley, I now think, where part of what they did back then was to memorize poems, commit their words to memory, where, as she so amply demonstrated to me, they continued to live in the mind, somehow among the things most there, it seems. And from this experience of her in learning poems by heart, as they say, she would say to me from time to time, and often now it seems, "You should make your students memorize poems." And so I did at last fall. Happily so at her bidding, because I realized that she was right, was on to something important, seeing how many lines and whole poems also live in my mind. Anyway, her head was full of poetry, and we would read and recite poems together, or rather, and also, she'd remember things or parts of things she once knew, and I'd look them up and read them to her. Lines like these, most of which have something to do with seeing, which I'll read here now, not only to you, but also to and for her, because she knew them by heart and loved them and would want to hear them here again too, which I hope will help us to see and hear her again too. From Shakespeare's Sonnet 73, "That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang." And from Shylock's speech on mercy in The Merchant of Venice, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as a gentle rain of heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes." And from Milton's sonnet, "When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, And from Wordsworth's sonnet on the state of the world, which seems strangely prescient, the state of the world then and now. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn, so might I, standing in the pleasant lee, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. And also these lines from Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. And these lines from Longfellow, which I didn't know, but she knew, and I looked them up and found the whole long poem and a photograph and a whole long story about it. From my study, I see in the lamplight, descending from the broad hall stair, grave Alice and laughing Allegra and Edith with golden hair. And these from Frost, of course, the Vermont connection. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And these lines from Dylan Thomas, which she returned to again and again late in her life, as if some kind of anthem to her leaving the world behind. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. I'm sure some people in this room have heard her say those lines. And finally, these lines, which also I didn't know, but she did. This, I think, from probably way back, from Edna St. Vincent Millay, who grew up on the seacoast of Maine. And when I was there once, we took a hike up the ridge above the coast and came to a bench that said Edna St. Vincent Millay, looking out over the water. So that was kind of cool. And these lines from Millay see the world in a kinder and gentler way than Dylan Thomas, I think, as all of us who knew her know that she herself did once upon a time and always. This is from the middle of the poem somewhere. All I could see from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. I turned and looked the other way and saw 3 islands in the bay. So with my eyes I traced the line of the horizon, thin and fine, straight around till I was come back to where I started from. And all I saw from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. Over these things I could not see. These were the things that bounded me. I could touch them with my hand almost, I thought, from where I stand. And all at once things seemed so small. My breath came short and scarce at all. But sure, the sky is big, I said, miles and miles above my head. So here upon my back I'll lie and look my fill into the sky. And so I looked, and after all, the sky was not so very tall.